incredible system of activity, don't you think? I mean, the person who invented that has got to be considered a total genius, don't you think? I mean, you can solve things with that system that before were not even conceived of as soluble. And that's what we call it, the calculus. Descartes invented that system. And you know, even now, I studied it for a couple years at college. It puzzles me. I don't know exactly how it works. A lot of people feel they don't need to use it anymore because they use computers and stuff, but it's the calculus that made the computers. So, I mean, whether you're using it or you're using an effect of it, you're using the calculus. I mean, let's face it, all of Einstein's equations are based on the calculus. And, you know, we consider those pretty impressive structures as far as describing the way the physical universe works. So that's why in this universe of these universities that we inhabit, everything is subjected to systematic or universal doubt unless you prove it. You can ask a simple question. Was you there, Charlie? Did you see it? Are you sure of that? In a lot of these religions, whether it's Christianity, Judaism, Islam, whatever, they base it on reliable witnesses. Oh, maybe. Reliable witnesses of the kind of the Sunni community in Baghdad today? Are those the reliable witnesses you're basing your conclusion on? Reliable witnesses like the people the Israelis took out of the Gaza Strip recently? Are those the reliable witnesses that you're basing your assumptions upon? Reliable witnesses like, who's that guy that just was on the TV and wanted to have the Prime Minister of Venezuela assassinated? What's his name?
Pat Robertson.
Yeah, Pat Robertson. He's a nice fellow, generally. Usually not a murderous guy, but he got really worked up apparently about something recently. Or Jerry Falwell. Are these your reliable witnesses? You see, that's the problem. Reliable witnesses may not be sufficient. So the point is that you can't be sure, finally, in a Western environment, of any claim until you've proven it. Why do I say this? Well, as I say, the Muslims say Muhammad could not read or write. All right, I'll give you the claim, but that doesn't mean that I am going to entertain personally. You can do what you like. We're all free in this class. My obligation is only to give you the claim. It's not to convince you of it. If I were in a mosque, my obligation might be to convince you of it. In a university, my obligation is only to present it to you. You have to decide right about concerning its truth value, if you like, or whether it recommends itself to you or whether you think it isn't. I'll be able to provide data which I think would show that the Prophet was able to do minimal reading and writing. But I won't do it at the moment. And I will contend at some point that if these writings do reflect his background, then he had done quite a lot of study too. If you're a believer, complete believer, without a modern Western university environment influencing you, then you say, that's the miracle, don't you understand? In Islam, the miracle is the Quran. Yes, in this class we will tell you what Islam says. The miracle is the Quran, but we are not propagandists. We are not here to convince you or not convince you of it. Just as I'm not going to convince you that the gospel stories of Jesus are true. No, I would not try to convince you about that. In fact, I would probably try to convince you the opposite. Al, you're in many of my classes. We treat the Old Testament the same way, don't we? We don't make distinctions between being kind to one group over another, do we, Al, in our religious studies department? We study religions. That's why it's called religious studies. We don't. We teach them in the sense that we try to propagate them. You follow me? And if I did try to propagate a given religion, then I would be a propagandist. Then I shouldn't be at a university. And if you have teachers who are propagating something in a religious sense to any class, then actually they shouldn't be here. They should be in a religious school. You say, oh my God, that's harsh. Yeah, state of California pays me to be a non-sectarian person. to treat all religions equally, to subject them all to the same amount of systematic doubt, not to curry favor, not to coddle people's sensibilities, and not to say something which I feel is probably something that would not be supported in the physics department, the chemistry department, the biology department, or any other university. In other words, to employ the same standards that they would apply in the history department, the biology department, the computer science department, and the physics department, as we would to the data we have before us here. So, that being said, I'm almost finished my big talk here. So I'll tell you what the club class is about in a minute, and then we'll go home. That being said, we may say things here that may hurt you. You know, they say in the world, 2 things you should avoid talking about. What are they? Religion and politics. Unfortunately, in this department, we often talk about both of these things. We are in the soup before the soup was even boiled. You can't do a religious studies class without offending somebody. It's not my mind to offend you. I don't want to offend anyone. I actually care that you should be a happy person and not feel aggressive, violence, bullying, or anger towards me or anyone else. But the sooner as you get into an area, even in your family, I'm sure you know this, where if someone has a belief, you inevitably get into a situation where you're offending someone. If someone comes in with an a priori belief, you can't even avoid, at some point, stepping on the wrong stone. And you're going to engender a negative feeling. Now that's going to happen in this class. As Al, who's been in many of my classes, will testify, it actually happens most in Old Testament, where you wouldn't think it would happen most. Much worse than Islam. Historical Jesus might be the second worst place it happens in. Old Testament is the most, for some reason, particularly evangelical Christians and fundamentalists are wedded to every word of the Old Testament, like the whole problem about Darwin now, and whether the creation theory of the Old Testament stands up or doesn't stand up, and so on and so forth. You'd be amazed the number of people who are wedded. Yeah, we're having battles in the U.S. Supreme Court over that. I don't think people have that issue with the Quran to that extent. So there are people who are wedded to the Old Testament in a way that you would not believe. So the anger in the Old Testament actually is much more intense than anything you as a Muslim might feel or you as a non-Muslim might feel. So what's the point I'm trying to make? If you can't take somebody discussing your religion in an academic, but maybe trying to be objective manner,